The takeaway we've found, I guess, in summary, twofold. Value of enterprise architecture of an organization can be categorized in terms of immediacy of information availability and in terms of innovation and transformation of the organization. We have two takeaways out of here today for ROI or for value. That's what we'd like you to remember. Now, if you have any questions at all, we'd be glad to entertain those. Don't be shy. We have some marathon stories. So go ahead.
Thank you both for a great presentation. I had a question for you, Rob. How do you measure value if you're not measuring ROI?
Well, when you're creating the enterprise architecture, what I think is critical at this point is what was said this morning, the Big Bang Theory. When we did ours at U.S. Customs, we did a business case and it was disapproved by OMB and GAO. And so then we did another business case and it was disapproved by OMB and GAO. So then we hired Arthur Anderson at the time and we came up with a $1 million cost effectiveness case that was sent over to OMB and GAO, and that was disapproved. But after 2 years of going through that exercise, we finally teamed up with KPMG and a couple of other companies and got a business case that incorporated the EA and incorporated the ROI to get what they wanted us to have in order to, and because we originally had, well, we're going to increase the revenue, we're going to increase effectiveness and efficiency, but they wanted to know specifics. We had, at the time, legacy systems and 100 and some support type companies, and we had to start getting into that kind of detail. That kind of detail on where we could redeploy inspectors to do different types of jobs. The big thing was, as a part of that, we were going to have, and we do, they do now, the sensors at the borders, and as part of NAFTA, you just come through the sensor tags and it makes an entry into the database and you don't have to go through the big stops, and so we're not stopping the cargo. What was interesting is we were getting an enormous amount of push on our ROI from the trade organizations because Ford and GM and Boeing and FedEx and Walmart and all those guys were bringing stuff across the border every day, and every bit of that, as you well know, has to be registered. Even U.S. Postal Service stuff, everything that comes into the border has to be entered into the automated commercial environment, which used to be the automated commercial system. So we had to get 21st century technology, and we had to get 21st century processes in order to do it better, faster, and cheaper, and that was what this was all about. They ended up delivering a business case with an ROI to OMB and GAO that was approved after 2 years, but it was after many millions were spent. And what I kept trying to say is at the end of the day, we were still doing anti-narcotics, anti-weapons of mass destruction stuff, and we still needed to move those out there for deterrence and for passengers coming in that we were trying to collect data on and stuff. So in each one, I've seen an ROI, and each one of them, when you look at an Exhibit 53, and if you're in the Department of Defense and Exhibit 53, they come back to each service, like in the Air Force, and they'd say, okay, here's, based upon the program budget decision cycle, the ones that we want you to show us your EA and your return on investment. So they'll pick a subset, and that subset is normally the subset that's very large and very visible. So in Exhibit 53, that has a listing of all your projects, that's in there. And then within the AA04 legislation, creating the Business Transformation Agency and requiring business enterprise architecture and going through the IRBs and the DBSMC that the DepSecDep chairs as the Chief Management Officer for DoD. In those IRBs, they have to pass muster. Number one, it has to have the business enterprise architecture. It has to have all of the returns, what the cost investment's going to be, what the return's going to be, and that's all part of that process. And then, if you know, in the agencies, it's all part of the CPIC process.
Thank you. Question? Anybody else? One more right here. We have time for one more after this, and after my call.
In a lot of agencies, EA is still not integrated in the business requirements development framework, and on the IT side, in the software development lifecycle. So pretty much they are so busy, they're developing requirements in the business side and moving through the SDLC phases on IT side. They don't see any EA value. So what are your thoughts on getting EA involved on the business side through the requirements development and concept refinement phase, and how to get EA involved in the SDLC phase?
Well, I think if you look at the two examples that and I'll just use the two examples that I had up there, at Customs and Border Protection when I was there, and it continues today, they have program control. They have the program management, which is a capital investment control process, but the program control has this SDLC. And the EA office, there's touch points within each one of those areas where primacy is either the investment process or the alignment of the architecture process, getting to the investment review board. And they have an architecture steering committee that is business stakeholder sponsored and supported. It's not just the IT people. And then they have a technology review committee that's more IT focused and centric. Now in the Department of Defense, when I mentioned earlier in my talk, there's months spent, probably 4 to 6 months wrap up of having EA as the foundation for the POM process. So it used to be military judgment, and the person that was the strongest and the loudest in the room would win the day in the budget corporate process. What wins the day now is empirical evidence and a sound architecture that has compelling reason on why it's going to do something in a certain way at a certain time with a certain effect. And that is what starts creating trade space within the corporate process. So that's all in an upfront part where we used to all show up and we'd have a group, a board, and the council, and everybody'd sit in rooms for months, and it would all just be, a food fight, and whoever was the strongest personality would come through. That's no longer sufficient.